Hey, George, you're a scientist.
Oh, I'm a chemist, yes.
Right, you're a scientist. So, when we were kids, Pluto was a planet. And hang on, wait, I know this has like been a whole meme thing on the internet for a while now, but I realized this is one of those things that is now gone like all the way out of the cycle that I bet there are a lot of people who know and accept that it is no longer considered a planet, or maybe it was never a planet, and like I don't actually know what happened there. But exactly the thing that just happened is probably happening to a lot of people, that they know that Pluto is no longer considered a planet, but I bet they couldn't say why. I don't think I could say why. I could make some swags, but I don't think I could actually say this is the specific reason that is no longer considered a planet. So why Pluto no longer considered a planet?
Well, darn it, Lions, I'm a chemist, not an astrophysicist, but with my very limited knowledge and very limited expertise, I will attempt to opine to this. So first, we must ask the question, what is a planet?
Not Pluto. Nailed it.
Yeah, got it.
Nailed it.
It is a miserable it's a miserable pile of celestial dwarfs.
Process of elimination. Well, let's think about what we know. Okay, so there are things in our solar system that I would say do not have a ton in common, but are considered planets, right? So like Earth is rocky and has water and life, and it is a planet. And then Jupiter is none of those things and is also a planet. So I guess the presence of like a rocky, mantle and a spinning metal core or whatever, like those are apparently not required features.
Nope.
Water and life obviously are not required features.
So few planets then.
So I'm thinking maybe either certain materials must be present regardless of the form they're in, or maybe like quantity. Like you gotta have a certain amount of stuff, because like an asteroid's not a planet, but it probably has a lot in common with like the rocky part of our planet.
Yeah, no, all good. And you kind of have touched on what these poor scientists were struggling with when they were trying to, define a planet. Because we actually, so let me, first of all, planet, apparently the root word is from Greek, which means wanderer, which I think that's kind of cool, right?
That is cool, but also like, does that not apply? Like planets have like orbits. I guess there's rogue planets.
I mean, I can wander around my house and still be wandering.
Yeah, that's true. I guess if you wander in the same elliptical orbit for billions of years, then where you still wander.
Yeah, and not all who wander are lost.
I do remember reading that somewhere.
Yeah. George R.R. Martin said that.
That's famously.
Just 100 of our listeners just all cried out at once.
George R.R. Martin's favorite famous character, Harry Potter, in his book Star Trek.
Yeah, in his book Star Trek and the Lando Calrissian Sorcerer's Stone. What are we doing? Oh, right, we're talking about planets. So when do you think that they actually formalized the definition for a planet?
I mean, if it's relevant to this conversation, I'm going to go with pretty recently.
Yeah, dude, 2006. Right? That feels way too late, considering that, when we talk about, like, oh, well, people knew about Mars's existence like 3,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago. And it's like, yeah, but at some point somebody was like, hey, we should probably get it together a little bit and formally define this, as opposed to being like, because up until then, planets were defined like another thing where it's like, I don't know what a planet is, but I know it when I see it, right? So that being said, it was just a loosely tossed around word until they defined it, which was, it is a celestial object large enough to be spherical and clear its orbit of other objects. So it has to be massive enough to do those two things.
Right, because if there isn't enough stuff, it won't create enough gravity to turn into like a spheroid.
Right.
Right. And if it's like the Oort cloud is like a bunch of asteroids, but that's the opposite of its orbit being cleared of stuff. That is an orbit full of stuff.
Yeah, that is all orbit stuff. Yeah, exactly, like the Oort cloud or the Kuiper belt, I think, or the asteroid belt.
Oh, I might have been at the Kuiper belt. I don't know. There's a bunch of crap floating around out there.
I think the Oort cloud, and this is definitely off the top of my head, the Oort cloud is like the furthest away thing that's full of junk, because it's like the limit of the star's exertion of gravity, you know. And then I think the Kuiper belt is inside of that, and we all know the asteroid belt, because that's the thing that separates the 8, because there's only 8 planets. So so basically that's what kicked Pluto out of the group, is that they had to define, and I'm sure these poor scientists had no idea what the flame war they were about to start is. They said like, hey, this makes sense. It means Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune are all planets. Pluto doesn't quite cut the muster, because it is spherical, but it has not cleared its orbit of all other objects. It's not quite massive enough to do that. So they were like, all right, well, you know what? That means Pluto's no longer a planet. And then everybody lost their collective minds, you know, because, you know, I learned all of the planets in 3rd grade, and God forbid I learned something new. So here we are. So then Pluto was like the true Greek god of the underworld world, or Roman god of the underworld, forced to wander forever all alone, the only dwarf planet in the solar system. But it wasn't. There are other dwarf planets, and I thought that was kind of cool. So we're going to talk about that for a minute. So is Pluto a planet? No, it is called I believe it used to be called a celestial dwarf, and now they've updated it to dwarf planet. Just, I think, to kind of be like, look, guys, we're trying. Please stop sending us emails. But there's actually, so when I was trying to look this up, there appear to be 5 other dwarf planets. One source I could find said 11, and I was like, I don't feel confident enough on this source, since everyone was saying 5 and this one was saying 11. I was like, you know what? And I think that it didn't concur with NASA's like site. So I was like, I'm going to go with NASA, because they seem pretty reputable. So one of them is Pluto. It has an atmosphere about, well, if you had to guess, so it does have an atmosphere, which is interesting. It's thinner than Earth's. About how much thinner would you say?
Like I'm gonna swing real wide and say it's like 1,000 times thinner.
It's 1,000,000 times thinner.
That's what I meant. No, 1,000 times thinner. See, you didn't let me finish. You interrupted me. That was very rude.
You just said the second one under your breath. 1,000 times thinner.
Yeah. Yes. That I believe that's actually the correct way to pronounce that number.
And it actually has a methane atmosphere. And it actually, which causes a temperature inversion, which I think is kind of cool, which is where the atmospheric temp is actually greater than the surface temperature. So it gets colder the further down you go into the atmosphere, which I think is kind of neat.
Huh.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yep. Yeah. So,
also, you can't breathe methane. Pretty sure it's poisonous.
Yeah. So sorry. Now I suddenly am mentally going down the rabbit hole of like what definitionally means breathing, because it's like, I mean, you can pull it into your lungs and exhale it, but like,
yes,
you know,
yeah, you can breathe it briefly.
Yeah. And then
it's also, I bet, really cold.
Yes, it is very, 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 very cold. In fact, so much so that methane is like hanging out a lot in the atmosphere, right? Like its atmosphere is made out of methane. Normally, if we had, you know, an atmosphere made out of methane where we're at, it would all kind of like evaporate off into the air, you know, because all the other gases are definitely solid at that temperature. So one of the other ones is Ceres, which little known was known about it until the Dawn probe of in 2015 went by. It has water, ice, carbonates, and clay is what it's made out of. And it's kind of cool because apparently it does seem to have a somewhat liquid water core. Because it is so full of brine and so intensely salty that it's able to keep it as a liquid even at those low temperatures. Which is, you know, kind of like, I always find planets and stuff cool because the physics gets so weird, you know, where it's just like,
yeah, at that scale.
Yeah, right. Where it's just kind of like, oh, well, it has liquid water. It's like, how? It's out in the middle of nowhere. It's like, it's super salty. It's like, oh, like an amount of salt that would kill anything that touched it on Earth. It's like, yeah, but, you know, it's doing its own thing.
And size-wise, is this thing bigger or smaller than Pluto?
Smaller than Pluto. It is actually kind of hanging out in the asteroid belt. So definitionally has not cleared its orbit. Right. But yeah, it's apparently large enough to be classified as a dwarf planet, but not so large as to clear its own thing. So therefore, it is a dwarf planet. Now comes the part where I start to brutalize these pronunciations because I have only read them. Haumea, Haumea.
Sounds good to me.
Right, close enough. So that is another one. It is past Pluto, and it actually has a ring that contributes to 5% of its total brightness. So, and that's like, again, we always like, oh man, Saturn's cool. It's got those rings. It's like, oh yeah, Haumea also has rings. It's like, the what now? What? Nobody cares.
Do Uranus and Neptune have rings? One of them has rings.
I think Uranus, one of them, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that the rings go north-south, right? Or on one of them.
Oh, yeah. One of them's like on its side.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think the axis of the whole planet is different than the axis of, like, its magnetic axis is perpendicular to all the other planets.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of astronomers that are like, you're wrong. You're wrong. And it's
wrong.
It's like, hey, man, this is what happens when you get a chemist and an IT guy talking about, talking about astrology. Astronomy.
No,
you
meant astronomy.
Yeah, no,
but you're kind of proving your own point.
Yeah,
there.
Right. So there's another one called an Make. It is Make.
Yeah, it's
right.
Definitely not make.
It's definitely not make, right? But anyway, so make is about 60% of the size of Pluto. It shows geothermal activity, which means there may be a subsurface ocean, which, kind of cool.
That's one of those things that like hurts my brain. Like I understand those words, but it's like, it's an ocean underground. It's under the ground. And it's like, you mean mud? And it's like, no, there's space where there is an ocean under the ground, but above other ground.
Yes, exactly. Right. And it's just like, oh, well, it might have liquid water. And it's like, oh, cool. It's like, so what would life even look like under there, man? That'd be crazy. And then finally, Eris. And it was actually originally thought to be a 10th planet, but then they were like, oh, no, man, if Pluto ain't making the cut, then Eris definitely isn't making the cut. It also may have a subsurface ocean, and it has lots of nitrogen ice on it. And nitrogen ice isn't a thing you get to say a lot because we normally think of nitrogen as a gas, but it's so cold that it turns to ice. And it really kind of reframes that cold snap that we had, right?
Yeah, I guess I shouldn't be all complaining now.
Yeah.
Still cold by my standards.
Like, oh man, it's cold outside. It's like, yeah, it's not as cold as make.
So this all comes down to like why is Pluto and these other things not planets? Is they set what seems like reasonable criteria, and it just happens to be on the other side of that reasonable criteria.
Yes. Yep. And if you ever wanted to, so actually this will all come together. So maybe we'll say during Constantine's time. As Emperor of Rome, because he was one of the emperors of like the Eastern Holy Roman Empire, if I remember correctly. So sorry, he just, for those of us that can't see your face, is all of it said, whatever, man.
I didn't say anything. I was going to just let you go.
But anyways, is that one of the things that was actually pivotal to his rule was there was a huge riot that happened one time because of in the Colosseum there were the greens and the blues, and he supported the greens and some people supported blues, and it's all a friendly rivalry until riots broke out, right? I say all of that to say that you don't really think of either the people rioting in the Colosseum because of the greens versus the blues, or people who are getting really into the Super Bowl. Picking factions on Pluto, planet, not planet, but that's all it is it's just, like some people said, hey, Pluto's not a planet anymore. And then a whole bunch of people decided to have a strong opinion about that, yay or nay. And now we're still talking about it.
That makes me wonder, like, is there something insane like that in all of us? where you're like, well, I wouldn't feel strongly about that thing. Like I would just recognize the new scientific evidence or the new consensus. And then someone says like, oh, did you know that taco is technically a kind of sandwich? I don't believe that. That's stupid. But like, but you know what I mean? Like if somebody said that and then you never had the means by which to interrogate that in yourself. So a lot of those Pluto people, probably the day before, they were completely normal, unassuming people. And then from their point of view, they didn't go out and buy a Pluto is a planet jersey. Somebody came and put one on them. Right. Or they look down and realize they had always been wearing it. And suddenly it's like, oh, God, I have such strong feelings about this and I have to write on the internet about it.
They just came home one day, took off their button down shirt, and underneath that shirt was a Pluto is a planet shirt. And they were like, what?
Oh, God.
What? No. And I can speak from an educated point of view because I did not know that I had that in me as well. Right. Until I was talking to somebody and I said like, look, because they were talking about, I think, like Star Trek Enterprise or something like that. And I said, like, look, Star Trek Enterprise isn't really for me, but I mean, all of the different Treks bring something to the table, So like, maybe you like Deep Space Nine, maybe you like Voyager, maybe you like whatever, but like, we all, like the Trek that we like. And the person said, like, yeah, and plus, I mean, we can all kind of agree, and they were serious. He said, plus we can all kind of agree that like TNG is the worst one. I said, you shut your fucking mouth. And it came out of me like a burp. Like I couldn't have stopped it if I wanted to. And I was like, whoa, okay, sorry. I was just like, hey man, let's all hold hands and sing Kumbaya and I will gut you.
Yeah. Ooh, well, the violent defending TNG aside, which by the way, you were right to do. This does remind me of some other celestial bodies I wanted to ask you about.